Unlock your potential with the Graduate Certificate in Arts Entrepreneurship from the Weitzenhoffer Family College of Fine Arts at the University of Oklahoma. In partnership with the prestigious Price College of Business, this innovative program is expertly designed for the aspiring arts entrepreneur, blending your creative and artistic talents with the business knowledge, skills, and strategies needed to successfully launch and manage arts-related enterprises. Affordable and fast track, you can achieve this transformative education remotely in less than 12 months. To learn more and to apply, visit ou.edu/finearts. New York Theater Ballet's summer repertory workshops offer pre-professional, collegiate, and post-collegiate dancers full-day training sessions of classes, rehearsals, and new choreography at their studios in Lower Manhattan. Each 2-week session, May 6th through 17th and June 10th through 21st, provides individualized instruction, movement analysis, and immersion in New York Theater Ballet's acclaimed repertoire. Aspiring students are invited to submit video auditions by April 30th. Merit-based scholarships are available. For more information, please visit nytb.org/auditions or click the link in the show notes. I'm Rebecca King-Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Sean Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance. Today on Conversations on Dance, we are joined by choreographer and director of Sydney Dance Company Rafael Bonachela and composer Bryce Dessner. Bryce and Rafael take us through their personal journeys towards finding their art as a profession, the inspiration and collaborative process behind their latest collaboration, Impermanence, and how COVID delays extended and altered the work into its present form. Impermanence will have its U.S. premiere at the Kennedy Center this April 25th, with shows running through the 27th. If you're in the Washington, D.C. area and would like to purchase tickets, visit kennedy-center.org. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are stretched across, 9 time zones. So this is somewhat of a miracle that we made it happen, but we're so glad, Rafael and Bryce, that you could both join us this morning. Since neither one of you have been on our podcast before, we always like to get a little bit of personal background before we get into the now, into your collaboration and what will be appearing at the Kennedy Center coming up. So let's start with Rafael and just hear a bit about how you first became interested in dance and at what point you started to forge a professional career, both as a dancer and then how that intersected with your work as a choreographer. 1 minute, go. No.
1 minute. Oh my God.
No.
I'll try my best. If I go right to the very beginning, I was that kid that absolutely loved dancing. I was born in the 70s. Franco was still alive. And it was just not the thing that a boy did. But nevertheless, it just felt incredibly natural to me. I'm the oldest of 4 brothers also. So unfortunately, I didn't have a sister that did ballet or anything like that so that I could just tag along. But in school, my favorite playground game was to make a dance. And I didn't know that was called choreography, but I just get whoever wanted to be part of that dance, I would take my cassette and I would just make a dance. And, it was later, when Fame came up, the series in 1982, that I was like, oh my God, you can go to a school. There's a place called New York. They're all singing and dancing and running in the streets, and but it's pre-internet, pre-YouTube, pre-any reference. My family worked in the textile industry. There was no school in my town. I'm not from Barcelona. I'm from La Garriga, and that's a small town in the outskirts. Beautiful, but small. There's 6 schools now, thank God. But at the time, there wasn't one. So it wasn't until 15 that I took a formal dance class. My parents allowed me to get the train. I would do high school in the morning, and it was a jazz class on a Friday night. Literally, the teacher said to my parents, "This boy has talent, and you should give him the chance and support him through this dance." So the deal was like, you have to finish high school and everything that you have to do in Spain before going to university, so that if this dance thing doesn't work out for you, you've got something to go back to. I was like, sure, I'll do that. And I then just became this obsession, which had to do more about becoming a dancer, because I had sort of realized that it was a possibility. I didn't really know the contemporary dance scene. And it's interesting because when I was 17, 16, my teacher, contemporary dance teacher, by then I went into a sort of full-time, every day, 3 classes a day. And then I did high school in the evening. She said, oh, there's a contemporary dance school in Barcelona. No, sorry, company called La Anónima Imperial. They're looking for dancers. You should go. I was like, sure. I went to this audition and I got a job with a contemporary dance company, and I didn't really know what that was about. It was weird music, it was, weird steps. It was certainly not jazz dance, but I was suddenly touring in Paris, in Europe, and then I realized that I needed more training. That yes, I got a job in a contemporary dance company, and they said to me, "Do this," and I do it, and it happened somehow. But I didn't really have the training behind me to become the dancer that I imagined to be. I went to London. I'm trying to be really quick. And then I did 2 years of training. I joined Rambert. And that was also another teacher saying to me, Rafael, there's a company called Rambert. I was like, oh, they sound famous. And they're doing an audition this weekend and you should go. So I went to do the audition and I got the job. I had never seen the dance company before because I couldn't afford it as a student in London, where I had spent 2 years training, obsessively doing every ballet class that I could do, every contemporary dance class. I think by then I knew that contemporary dance was my thing. And I made it to fame, actually, because the school in London was like a musical theatre school. But it's the one that gave me the scholarship. So I was like, I'm leaving Spain. I need to be not the only boy in the class. I need to look up to other people and see and go like, I want to do that. I want to be able to do that jump and that excitement, that learning dance, So then I got a contract with Rambert and I saw them perform like 2 months later. And I was like, oh my God, like this is a dream come true. And I spent 12 years with the company as a dancer. And then the company had this season called workshop season. And it was an opportunity for the company members to create on company members, which is quite common in big companies like Rambert and stuff. So I said to Christopher Bruce, I was like, oh, I want to make a piece. I used to love making a dance when I was little to, Michael Jackson and Madonna and all of the, huge pop stars. And he was like, no, you're too young. I was like, oh my God, I'm too young to dance. I'm too young to choreograph. But I must have been such a not persistently nightmare that eventually he let me make a work. And that work made it to the repertoire. So, he said to me, yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, that's full on, but sure, let's do it. And that was it. From that point, my connection to creating dance came back, to making a dance, to choreographing. And I had the incredible opportunity that within Rambert, every opportunity that was given to me, I took. And then if I didn't get them, I found them. And then eventually I became an associate choreographer for the last few years of my career as a dancer, until I decided in 2004 to just let go of dance, like that dream that I never thought was going to happen, which was to be on a stage dancing, and in Rambert was like, Merce Cunningham, Christopher Bruce, G. Killian, Twyla Tharp, Carol Armitage. Like I got to do like, Wen McGregor, Ohad Naharin. It was like the best choreographic school I could have ever dreamt of.
Right.
Because I've never taken a choreography lesson or anything. It was just, I love the process. I love being with them. And if they told me to go off in a corner and think about circles, I would spend hours thinking about circles, so I realized that was a lot of fun. And that's how it all sort of happened for me.
I find that interesting when you were talking about when you were a kid and on the playground, you were just creating dance, but you hadn't even had any formal training yet. Like, I think from my perspective, like I started dancing at 3. So I had this background always of like what the steps were. This is a tendu, this is this. So how do you feel like, because you were already like creating without a vocabulary, even so you were just like really just doing your own thing. How do you feel like that has informed your work?
Well, I guess there was a very instinctual way of approaching it, in a way, like there was and a very sort of love for the joy of it, you see. So because I didn't have that rigor and that discipline that comes with the being free and being told to stand on a line even before you walk into the class. And yesterday we're in Portland, and we were given some studio by the Oregon Ballet, and as the afternoon came in, there was all these kids that were coming, in their pink leotards, and they like not even 3, and they all have to stand on a line and blah blah blah. And I was like, oh my god, that's how it works. And most of the dancers in the company were those dancers, but for me there was, in a way, autodidacta. How is that word when you're
self-taught?
Self-taught, yeah. So there was something about just making it up.
Right. Yeah.
I'm still making it up, really. I'm still making it up, not knowing really what I'm making, but it's sort of happening. So, and there was that thing of being really bossy, because I had to like getting all my friends, and sort of, I even forced my brothers at some point, my 2 younger brothers, when they were young enough to not realize that they were wearing tights, and that that was not a cool thing to do for them as men, boys. I got them into it. So I guess that joy, I try to never forget the joy that dance gave me as that child, because dance is only hard work, really. And when you were talking about the steps, I remember when I went to high school, a ballerina joined the high school, because people from other schools came, and she was at the Conservatoire in Barcelona. And she was like gorgeous and long neck. And she said to me, this is a plie. And I was like, oh my God, things have names. Like, so we were like in the school, and she was like, yeah, a plie, you bend your knees. I was like, oh, bending your knees is a plie, and this is a tendu, and da. And I'm like 14 at the time.
Right.
So I have absolutely no clue that there's this, whole world of, yes, that's what helps you to become a dancer.
Right.
Everything else.
Yeah. Bryce, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your own journey to composition. When did you start creating your own music, and at what point did that start to have like a little bit more of a formal look, or seem like something that you could pursue professionally?
Yeah, well, my story might not be as interesting as Rafael's, which is actually I had heard all of that background. That's amazing. I grew up in suburban Ohio. I played classical music as a kid. I played flute. My dad was a drummer in the 60s, like a 60s jazz drummer. So there was music around the house. And my sister was a dancer. So we grew up also. In a way, I would say the whole idea of being an artist, of making work, of writing music really was always sort of, dance was always present. And some of the first like classical pieces of music I would have heard would have been ballets. Going to see the Cincinnati Ballet is quite a good sort of Balanchine. A lot of old former New York City ballet dancers were there teaching there in the 80s. My sister was studying with them, and she used to go to the Chicago like summer ballet school, and we would take her up there and drop her off and then see the, and so it was a sort of that, I think, between New York City Ballet and the Joffrey and like the, or we would go to New York sometimes and see the ballet with her. So I grew up around dance, and in addition to that, my sister was kind of a punk. She's 3 years older, and so we grew up in Southern Ohio around like punk and post-punk music. So basically, from the time I was like a teenager, I was playing classical. I was kind of, I played flute, and then I enrolled in the conservatory in town, and I like learned classical guitar. But pretty early on in my sort of, by the time I went to college, I started writing music for my sister to dance to, I would say. And early on, it was solo guitar pieces, actually. which brings us to Spain.
Yeah.
No, I was really interested in Spanish music, actually. And it's a shame we didn't meet earlier, Rafael, because we have many more works. But
I mean, there's maybe another one. There's maybe a
yeah,
return to
yeah.
the
But
Spanish guitar.
yeah. But I guess you know, I started composing at Yale when I got there, and I showed up as an 18-year-old, but I kind of in my naive Midwestern naivete or something, I just decided to start auditing all the School of Music classes, including the composition classes with Martin Bresnick and classical guitar and chamber music. And Yale is an incredible place full of like exceptionally talented people. What's was a bit odd to me when I got there is as an undergrad, I wasn't allowed to, study. You could study music theory and history, but you couldn't actually go take composition or instrumental classes. It's a kind of theoretical basis in the undergrad. That's just the nature of the system. So I ended up staying there and doing my master's degree there, and getting to play a lot, and then moved to New York in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that's when I really started writing, was involved in a lot of downtown music, working with a lot of the things that we get to do was writing for dance. Again, my sister had a small company that I would work with. There was a former Merce Cunningham dancer named Alan Good, who was like one of Merce's principals in the sort of like the last 30 years. And I wrote a couple of pieces for his company, and yeah, it kind of went on from there. I was working a lot with people like Steve Reich and Philip Glass and Michael Gordon and David Lang, the kind of Bang on a Can collective, and there's a lot of dance around them as well. And additionally, I would say in those early 2000 years, the kind of art that I was going to see, I was really drawn to sort of DIY independent music scene, which obviously then my band got very involved in. But I think dance, especially in America, has always been a real, just incredibly inspired and exciting environment, whether it be downtown dance. Like I was doing concerts at a place called The Kitchen, which is an important venue for downtown dance, where I would have seen people like Anna B, or like Big Dance Theater or Sarah Mitchelson, or a lot of important New York choreographers working. But then also we would go see the New York City Ballet. I would go to the BAM Next Wave Festival and see people like De Keersmacher or Ballet Frankfurt or Pina Bausch, or and so that it was like always in the air. And I just really developed a love for it. A lot of my favorite pieces of composed music are pieces like The Rite of Spring or the Tchaikovsky ballets, or even pieces of instrumental music like there's movements of a Mahler symphony that are very dance-like, but they're not written for dance, but they're obviously heavily informative of that. And yeah, and I think, obviously I come from a background that's very kind of equally footed in playing in rock bands, which I've been doing since I was a teenager. Shortly after I put down that flute and picked up the guitar, my brother and our drummer Brian, we had bands, which eventually in our early 20s turned into the National, and it's still going. But I also was doing a lot of serious, more avant-garde, either composition or performance, and to varying degrees of, obviously I work a lot with major orchestras now. And I've written a ton of, music in different ways. But I think, dance has always been something that so it's basically, long story short, like the collaboration with Rafael and the opportunity to work closely with a choreographer is like a total joy. And it's sort of where I just feel extremely comfortable. And it's so wonderful just to that interaction, and what dance brings to the music and vice versa. I think is like this sort of area of wonder for me.
So Rafael had his brothers dancing. Did your sister ever make you, Bryce, dance with you? Did you ever try your hand, or you just were like, I'm gonna sit back and watch and I'm gonna do the music?
We it's a shame. I wish we definitely, I think it's the opposite of what Raphael was saying. We had a sister who was like exceptionally talented and beautiful. And we were just these like sort of little, funny little twins or whatever. No, we never danced. And Never got to, yeah, no, I've never taken a class. I would, maybe I need to do it. Next time I come to Sydney, I'm going to come join the,
I think you have to.
Yeah.
That sounds like the
I mean,
right thing.
I have a close friend who works a lot with dance, and I think he's so intimidated by, like, dancers physically are intimidating. It's like we're, being around professional athletes are just these beautiful, including Rafael. He's a choreographer, but he's like clearly a dancer.
Mhm.
So that also, are both of you dancers? Actually, I should ask.
We
Sounds like
we are. Yeah.
Yeah, with Miami
Yeah.
City Ballet. We used to dance with
cool.
them. Yeah, we're
Okay.
retired now.
Uh,
So we know what you mean about bodies being intimidating these days.
Yeah, I'm good. Justin, well, we won't, this we're on a podcast, but Justin and Pat.
We're going to talk about that. That's on our list.
for sure. Yeah. It's funny. When you said Ohio, I grew up in Kentucky. I grew up in Lexington, so I also was often at the Cincinnati Ballet, usually for Nutcracker. So that was like a prime memory from my childhood too, and an influence. But this might be a little tangential, but you're talking about all these different genres that you've flirted with or that you've exposed yourself to throughout your life. I'm wondering if both of you could actually speak to what you think makes danceable music, though. Like what you mentioned the Mahler, and you say that it's inherently danceable, even if it wasn't written for dance. Like Bryce, when you're composing, how are you treating it differently? And then maybe for Rafael, like what attracts you to music that you find it will be danceable, that it will be choreographable?
Mm-hmm.
I think that dance as an art form, there's so many things that the power of dance can express. Music has obviously its own language and is this incredible collaborative art form. I find the kind of poetic power of dance as a language, the sense of like fluidity and a lack of a beginning and an end, and the way that dancers and choreographers create work in the studio. There's so many different access points to that. I mean, obviously the kind of rhythmic energy is probably the first point of entry for me of creating one thing I can say that's been true of all the dance companies that I've gotten to work with, and I have worked with several now. Dancers are incredibly musical by definition, and have really complex understanding of music, based on years of memorizing steps. And so and I mean that formally, actually. I've written pieces, I'm aware of it, having seen them count, having written complex music. They internalize things in this very physical way where you can play with that, basically. And so that's a language that's really informed my writing. And like, even I recently wrote a piano concerto, actually, and the first movement is written for dance, but there's no dance. It's a dance, right? But it's kind of like I'm seeing the movement as I write it. So that's one thing I would say, that certainly in terms of music for dance. But that said, I've loved going to see Merce Cunningham pieces where it's like Cage and Cunningham, they didn't collaborate on that, they just put it together, and there's this poetic power in that I think that the range of things that can be danceable. Or I saw Kyle Abraham, I saw a piece where he did without music at all. It was silent music, and I think there's such a range of what can work. Yeah.
I saw Rafael thinking about that piano concerto. He's like, let me get my hands on that. I want to hear that.
Oh, no. I'm always on the lookout. Trust me. Always on the lookout for music. And I think, like Bryce was saying about how dancers see the music and understand the music. For me, I never know really where, what I need to see movement too. So, I need to close my eyes, and I physically do that with a piece of music. And it could be from any background and any style. And of course, I'm incredibly attracted and seduced by strings. That's just something that I don't know why. But then if I am, then I'm like, okay, I've never done piano. I'm going to do a piano one now. So I always like that challenge of something that's going to sound different and it's going to feel different. I started choreographing to pop songs. Yeah, the perfect 3.5-minute pop song when I was, 8. And then later on in my life, pop came back and I was choreographing concerts for Kylie Minogue, which was like an episode in my life in London, and Tina Turner, and all these things happened in my career that I was like, oh, those days of Michael Jackson and Madonna and whoever else at the time really were useful to me now.
Yeah.
When that came. But my relationship with music, I was obsessed with Merce Cunningham and John Cage in a way that most dancers aren't. Because I remember everyone hated it that we did Merce Cunningham. A lot of dancers actually didn't enjoy it. And I don't know why, as a 20-year-old that gets a job in Rambert, and the first program that I went to see before I even had seen the company, but I had signed the contract because it was a job. I keep doing that sometimes. I'm like, I better find out a little bit more about what's this. But I was sitting in the wings, totally fascinating about this concept that the dance that exists by itself, so that's the music and the art, and every night could be different. And but I guess there was something about the risk on collaboration that really. But I thought no one else can do that. That's Merce and that's John Cage, and it's a moment, and we all need to learn from that.
Yeah.
But I need to find who I am and what that journey is. And I remember then the director at the time of Mark Baldwin, I was using a lot of like really, soundscapey, contemporary sound music. I would have never thought I would choreograph to a symphony, for example. When I first started choreographing, that was so scary to me. And talking about the past, the one thing that I did as a kid was I sang in the choir. So I remember the choir, the church in the town started a choir. And I was like, oh, singing. Yeah, I want to sing. And I told my parents, and I sang for many years every Saturday. So I got a little bit of music education for free, thanks to the church, and then I sort of discovered dance. And then my mom had to go and tell the priest that, I didn't want to sing anymore because I wanted to dance. But like, I love choir sound, for example. That was part of my growing up, the singing and the voice. There's something about voice that I love. So there's all these elements that I've had to also teach myself, because it is true that, I didn't go to musical concerts when I was little. I didn't have that as part of my life. So I remember going to a tour in Hungary in 1989. And the older dancers in that company, L'Anonyme Imperial, they all knew that you could buy CDs for like, I don't know, 1 cent or something, classical music CDs. And I came back to Spain with like my suitcase full of classical CDs by all these composers that I never, to sort of also educate, because I was fascinated by it. So my journey with music, it's been progressive. And then the director of Rambert said to me, I am commissioning you, but you have to do a Benjamin Britten piece or something. And I was like, oh, what? Like, how do you dare to tell me? But I was desperate for a commission. So I said, yes, sure. And I found there's a piece I can't remember the title now, but it's quite dark. And it has poems by James Blake, like really, really dark. And I went for that. And that was my beginning of using music that was more within the classical realm, So it happened in little chapters. But for me, I switch now from the one thing that Cunningham and being in Rambert gave me was again, I use the same word, I guess. No, I use risk, but it's the bravery of commissioning. Rambert was about commissioning, and Rambert was about if the music can be played live, no matter how weird the Merce Cunningham, John Cage, buckets thrown on the floor, whatever it is that the score is asking for, if it can be done live, it will be done live. Right. And I grew up with that, and there would be choreographers coming to Rambert which would refuse about their work to be played live because they wanted it to be exact every night. And for me as a dancer, there was something thrilling about, they could be slower, they could be faster, they could be anything, and that's, but there's this energy between the live music and the dancer performing live that's really exciting. So what makes the perfect music for dance? I don't really know. I just know that I hear something and I connect with it. And when I first heard Ahem, by Bryce, I was walking in a park in Sydney, I remember, and it was a beautiful day. And, there was things that had been happening in my family, with my mother having an accident, and I was so far away. And then suddenly this music made me feel everything that I was feeling at the moment. And I saw movement. And that's like, okay. And I was like, and I cannot believe that it was like 40 minutes from beginning to end, because it doesn't always happen. Sometimes I'll find a piece of music by a composer and it's 40 minutes, but only 20 makes sense to me because they talk to me. And sometimes there's beats that are challenging, but I love that. Often the challenging beats for me are the cute beats, so the cuter the music is, the more challenging for me. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to take that and I'm going to see how I can deal with that, but not make it cute. Like actually, how can I twist and subvert this really, like, so anyway, that's really, for me, I have to close my eyes. And it may not just be steps, but it may be a situation in the stage and a feeling. And, I really connect with music in an emotional way. And then once I do that, then I absolutely get into the craft of it and I write my own music maps. If you saw them, you'd be like, what is this? Because I have these drawings that it's like, and they go up and down so that I have a sense of the journey of the music. And then I start filling it up. I see two dancers. I see everyone, they're really like handwritten pieces of how I see the music and how I feel the music. And it literally has like dots and points and things mean things to me, not to anyone else. And then my rehearsal directors, they're like, what is this? And then I use the dancers a lot. I literally will say to the dancers, I can't count this. Can you help me? And then there's a few of them that are like, so like Bryce said, like they have an ear that's like,
they know,
out of this world, and they'll be like, yeah, it's a 6 and a 7 and a 12 and followed by a 2 and a 6 and a 5, blah, blah. And I'm like, amazing. And I've been at home trying to like spend all night, and then the dancer solves it for you because they just have it in them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the collaborative process now. Bryce, you've worked with Justin Peck, as you mentioned. And actually, when Rebecca and I first started this podcast, we were still dancing. And Justin is a longtime friend of mine. We grew up at SAB together. We lived next to each other in the dorms. And he was one of our first guests. And he immediately suggested you. So this is like 7 years down the line.
I think
we wanted you to.
We've met each other, haven't we? I'm looking at you and I'm like, we definitely have we met in person?
It seems possible. Yeah. I mean, we run in the same circles. So, but yeah, I mean, he was just like the collaborative process with you, I think for him was something really special. So I'd love to hear, I guess a little bit about what your process is and how it differs when you are working on a dance work and how much back and forth you typically have with a choreographer, how open you are to suggestions. Like, there's the famous thing of Balanchine and Stravinsky and Agon, where, Stravinsky's kind of joking with him and he's like, well, how long do you want it? And Balanchine's like, I don't know, 20-ish seconds. He's like, 20 or 21, that sort of thing. Like, what's your back and forth like for this particular process?
I think it really varies. I would say that, like with both Justin Peck and with Rafael, they've both choreographed existing pieces, like Frame of Mind, which is the first evening length work that Rafael did together. He did to 3 of my existing string quartets, so a Haim, a piece called Little Blue Something, and then a big string quartet called Tenebrae. And so that was more, this beautiful process of music I spent a lot of time writing that then Rafael really inhabited and created a work and gave it, larger meaning. And Impermanence, the piece we'll be doing at the Kennedy Center, is different because it was a commission and we really spent a lot of time talking about subject matter and, just kind of inquiring into things that were on our minds. And, and eventually I came on this this theme of impermanence that at the time it was actually really specifically related to both the big fire in Notre Dame that happened in Paris, and then it like just after there were the really devastating bushfires in Australia. So it was like,
Right.
just thinking about how fragile everything is and how nothing is permanent, and even the things that the structures and institutions around us, or even I think it was during the Trump years as well. Ooh, should I not do politics on the Kennedy side? And things that what is right and wrong and what is true and false, and all these. So that the piece ended up kind of in a general way, we came to that theme. And then Raphael gave me a lot of leeway at the start of the process to compose as we talked about frame of mind. We had worked with a string quartet on stage, and it's an incredible string quartet, the Australian string quartet, who are like exceptional. And that physicality of those instruments and the way I write for them and the way the dancers interact with them, that was something we wanted to explore in a more deliberate way, which I think is really successful in Impermanence, to have them on stage with the dancers. And so obviously, the piece inspired me to write music that I would think of for dance. There are more abstract, dissonant, lyrical passages that have a kind of stillness about them, and then there are really intense, driven passages that there's several movements that just keep going and going further. And then there was an extra layer of electronics that in terms of, I love, compared to a straight up classical concert where it's often just acoustic, dance venues, obviously, and the audiences that come, it tends to be a younger audience, really hungry for new music. And so to have the kind of the potential to kind of push the sound. So there is like an undercurrent in spots of where the live string quartet is then accompanied by modular electronics and sub sounds. And so it has a really powerful presence in the theater. I think that was, once we had kind of done it, and then Raphael asked me to expand it. And then in places he would like, oh, I need 13 more seconds here. What can you do? Is there like, it's so amazing, but is there and we would back and forth like that. And I would say that was similar with Justin, the works that we've done. He said, there's a piece that he's done a lot called Murder Ballads. That's a sneaker. It's like, I think it's the first sneaker ballet, which now he's done a lot.
It is. Yeah.
And that's to a piece that, I was commissioned by the Los Angeles Dance Project and an ensemble based out of Chicago called Eighth Blackbird to write that piece. It was written at this, I knew I was writing for Justin. So I really, again, thought about that. And it's all inspired by American folk songs and these kind of terrible murder ballads, which are, ostensibly these horrifically violent. A lot of our classic songs have terrible stories, which is not surprising in America. But yeah, I would say that piece kind of just happened in this beautiful way, and it was a really wonderful. It was at a time when we were all living near each other in New York, and so I was spending a lot of time with Justin when he was doing that, and I was there in the studio when he was making it. Later, we did a big ballet at the New York City, a story ballet at the New York City Ballet called The Most Incredible Thing. And that was like, 50 minutes long and it was all based on a, programmatic story, a Hans Christian Andersen story. So that was very, very specific, I would say. And the timing was very specific. And so, all of the above, basically, like in terms of collaboration. I've had other situations like with the choreographer Benjamin Millepied, or different types of scenarios where but it's always really interesting to me, and I always end up making music that I wouldn't make otherwise.
So I wonder what the process was like then, Raphael, in the studio. So we did one piece one time that had music commissioned, and the music didn't come in the final way until the very end. And so it's such a different process. So what are you working with in the studio? What kind of music do you have from Bryce as you're creating, and then it's all coming together? Or was it all done before you even got in the studio?
No, look, for me, okay, so Impermanence was very much in chapters, because then like it was a 40-minute piece that never got premiered because it was the week of the 20th of March of 2020. So, it was already a very charged piece because, and before I talk about the dancers, for me, when I commission work, it's very important that the composer, in this case with like Impermanence, and the idea behind whatever it is that we're going to make that doesn't exist. And in my case, there isn't even a script or there isn't a story because it's pure dance in every way, but there's always a strong concept that's driving us. And it took us 2 years, actually. And one failed attempt to an amazing idea that, at the end it couldn't happen. So then we were, every time I go to Europe, we'll meet in Paris and have a coffee and then go to the studio and spend time together. And then Bryce said, look, I've been thinking a lot about impermanence, and the ephemeral nature of life. And, because of course, Notre Dame, but also life, and the human planet and human relationships. And I was like, that is just so beautiful and so powerful and something that's so connected to live performance. Nothing is ever there forever. Everything moves, everything transforms, everything shifts, everything's constantly changing. So I was like, I'm in, let's do it. So we knew that we both had something that we were very driven, to compose the music. And then, for me, I prefer to have the music as early as I can, whenever possible. But again, like Bryce said, processes are never the same. They shift from project to project. So for me, the longer I have the music with me, or some of it, the longer I can immerse myself in it before I go into the studio. Right. So there was a lot of emails backwards and forwards about alarms and, Bryce, he was writing the music at the end of 2019. Wow. And there was the black bushfires, they call them. So there was people evacuated in boats in the middle of the water because their homes were burning. And I remember Bryce writing to me a lot on how much that was affected him. I was actually in Cuba. I was working with a national company there, and I was totally missing what was going on in Australia the day to day. But literally, Sydney was grey. So there was this sort of like what's happening right now in this moment that was really driving Bryce in the composition, and it was also happening to people in Australia who were the ones that were going to dance this work. So even the work as the work was taking shape, life itself was really driving it in many, many ways, from the idea of impermanence. And then, so I love to have as much as possible. I remember Bryce sent me the music and I was in Cuba. So after my rehearsals, I walk down the Malecon and I have my headphones and I'm listening, the sunset's happening. And then the day after, maybe there's this whole torrential, so the weather is going crazy. This work is sort of informed by nature also and everything else, and I was listening to this piece of music that it was just like sublime. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, I wish I would have asked him to do a full length. But because it was our first collaboration together from scratch, I thought, we've never done anything together. There's obviously a connection here, but 40 minutes, that was the first life of this work. And then when it comes to the movement and the work and the dance, is always a very collaborative process with the dancers. So they are, as incredible artists, fully involved and fully allowed to dig as deep as they can and they want to within themselves to offer themselves to the process. And I will be forever grateful for that. So I always like to say that I want to work with, like open-minded dancers with intelligent bodies. They've spent their whole life training it, but they have so much more that they can offer. So on my first day, I will share with them the conversations that have been going for months with Bryce, like literally months, from the moment of we're going to make a work in January 2019, it premiered in March 2020. So it was a long process, to build this. And then I'm like, I often say to them, look, I'm telling you what I know, but there's so much that I don't know. And there's so much that we're going to find out together in this process. So sometimes I do improvisations, but not always, depending on the time. So I don't think for Impermanence I had a lot of time. So I went straight to task making. And then I will always devise new tasks and new ways of thinking about provoking the dancers to contribute in building a vocabulary that's that a vocabulary that comes from the ideas from the work. And what Bryce gave me was just gold, because he was like, okay, it's 12 movements. No, at first it was 8. So this is pre-COVID, his alarms, disintegration, alarms to emergency, impermanence, ashes, requiem. Everything came from, it was really from emails and from the ideas of the ephemeral nature of life, and how, in a way, for me, that when I think about that, I think about the need for living every moment, which is what dance is, and the live for radiance in a way, so that not everything is, I think it was the juxtaposition of beauty and devastation in this idea that we were really both excited about. There is something really devastated about a forest that's just been burned, and we're talking about like miles and miles, but then when you see that very green, the first bit of green that's growing against the black, the beauty that is, that life keeps, things keep coming back, thank God. So little did we know. So with the dancers, there's this I devised the tasks. They can be stimulation, they can be text, they can be sensations, they can be feelings. Often I also really very much choreograph in the spot with the dancers in front of me if I have a very clear idea of what I want to make, and I build the structure and the architecture of the work. So it's a mix of things. And then obviously for this work there was a lot that I thought about, specifically in terms of the ideas of fire, and the ideas of things existing for a moment and then going. There was things about collapsing and rebuilding that are part of that the choreographic process. Ideas of panic, ideas of crisis, anxiousness. The fight or flight idea was something interesting. I do a lot of preparing, and when people are in situations of fire, you almost, like, the adrenaline hits you, and you almost become more aware of like how to, you either you fly, or you fight, or you die, or so all of that became part of how to build this movement, the sense of urgency, fearlessness, awareness, mournfulness, sorrow, loss, but also beauty, the butterfly effect, so I try to draw. So with what Bryce gave me and all of those conversations, then I make a mind map. So it's another, I like paper and pen. I draw this life map of all these things that I'm telling you now. And then I present it to the dancers, and I'm like, okay, today we're going to think about a fireball, so there's a section which is emergency 2, and there's a fireball, and the fireball for me is these 5 dancers. And I was like, okay, so you're full of energy. The floor is burning, so you can't stop moving. You are totally interconnected as a 5. And this came from reading about a fireball that's shooting across the stage. Of course, that's possibly never what people will see, but it doesn't matter to me, because it came from an idea that was triggered by what Bryce was thinking about. There's a beautiful duet called Embers. There's a section called Embers. And Bryce titled each section. So for me, I saw 2 dancers radiating in the space like 2 small particles, like brightly glowing, slowly burning and fading away, connecting, with those ideas of loss. There is a solo, which I made with Juliet, this dancer, which is disintegration. And now there's another dancer, Nayara, performing it, and she just melts, and it's so emotionally powerful. But because Bryce gave me this piece of music called Disintegration, and then, so I played with the idea of disintegration with everybody. Everybody played with disintegration in the stage, but one person made sense to me. And that one person was Juliet, but it could have been anyone.
Right.
So there's a very open, very democratic in a way at the beginning. Like, no idea is a bad idea for me at the beginning of a creative process. But then I become really like, only that is right. And only that makes sense. And it happened to be Juliet. and in other sections was somebody else. So yes, I mean, that's really my process. When I come, Bryce and I knew from the beginning that we were not going to be able to be together a lot in the same room. Yeah. But little did we know that no one was going to be able to be together.
Right. Who would get
in a
used
row.
to
So
it.
it's that we were committed to emailing and then meeting in Paris, not a bad choice or a bad thing. Every time that I went to visit my family in Barcelona, whatever. But we were not going to be in Sydney, which I had been doing that a lot for the last few years. Once I lived in Sydney for a while and I started to get to know collaborators. But it was exciting to be able to do this in the distance. And then we're about to open, and that was the week we're lighting the work, and it was a double bill with a William Forsythe work. And so, like my dream sort of evening, a newly commissioned score by Bryce Dessner with a string quartet on stage, electronics, etc. And then a work by a masterful, choreographer. And we literally couldn't open. I stayed doing the lighting. And then I called Bryce and I said, well, Bryce, it looks like it's going to be more than 2 weeks. And we're thinking that when we come back, people don't want intervals. They're going to want to come in, watch 1 hour of dance and go because of masks and everything that was being discussed of how maybe there was a possibility. Why don't we use this moment and you extend the music? So in a way, we lost so much. We lost the proximity to people, the proximity to family, the proximity to loved ones. We lost touch, things that we are given in life, and in dance and in my dance, we touch a lot. There's something about connection and duets and trios and quintets. And suddenly we couldn't. So Bryce then was like, okay, let's do it, and he composed and put together another 25 minutes of music. Wow. We're still in lockdown.
Right.
Yeah. So this is an interesting work because what was already very charged, and very poignant with this whole fire and it's like, it's been like the opening night. A work called Impermanence doesn't happen because of a pandemic. I mean, that, the ironic twist that didn't get lost in it. And in a way, there is sections of the work which I forget about, but because we're performing it again, where the dancers are not touching, and they're actually not touching because I choreographed that when we were wearing masks and we had to be 1 meter and a half from each other. And trust me, in Australia, people would do what they're told. Yeah. It's just how it is. So there's this beautiful duet between two women, and they just constantly around each other, finding each other in the space. And that whole section, which is emergency, eventually there was some touching, but not really connecting in a way that's more than just I'm touching your hips and then I'm moving away. And, and so COVID and social distance, and it's in the work. Not in a way that you're like, oh, that was made in COVID. Again, because it's all abstract ideas that, but it was a very moment in time that really made that work for Bryce and for I and for the dancers. So it was really charged emotionally in many ways. And the last thing I will say is that, we performed it during COVID in Australia and people were like in tears and da. But of course, we were back in theaters with live music, even if it was only 50% of the audience or masks. And then I thought, we took it to Madrid for the first time last year internationally, well after COVID, thinking, and I told this to Bryce, I was like, I hope the work makes sense. I had a moment of because this was so in that moment where we were all so desperate to be together. Yeah. And to be back in a theater and to be back sharing live performance, and people loved it. So it was like, okay, yeah. The work is the work, regardless, because actually it's full of universal. Even if it was fires and COVID and blah blah, at the end of the world, the work continues to surprise us in ways that we hope it didn't. In terms of what's going on everywhere in the world. So there's still this need for for that, for the beauty that dance and music and dancers and brings, to an audience.
Right. Maybe just for our final question, we could hear what you're hoping audiences that will see the ballet at the Kennedy Center April 25th through the 27th take away from the work, and how this moment in time might impact their viewing.
Bryce, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that I feel dance as an art form is capable of communicating on a level that is the essence of life. I think that this work in particular, which is about impermanence, which is about, how beautiful and how fragile and how, wonderful but painful. We can hold two emotions at the same time. You can have deep pain in your heart and appreciate beauty. And these things that it's difficult to write that down. It's difficult to show it in a film or in a novel, but something about the dance form and the poetry, maybe in a way, poetry and dance, like a poem does it well. But I think that something about seeing the human body and expressing these things, which are actually, they're in a way very simple ideas, but deeply fundamental to human existence. And I also think, reflecting on that, coming together in a theater to experience these things together, I think is important. And so there's, at the end of the day, for me, that kind of communion and bringing people together, and if especially in the craziness of what we live in now and how virtual our lives have become and distracted our lives have become, I think to just center people and hold their attention for an hour of beauty and to experience these profound artists who have come from Australia and Spain together, what the Sydney Dance Company represents, and the just intense artistry and how hard they work. I mean, it's an exceptional company that's what they do is very specific to them. And so I think that just being in the room with that and that kind of, awareness and is what's important to me, that experience. And I wouldn't put a name on it necessarily, because I think everybody's going to interpret it differently.
Yeah. Rafael?
Yeah, and I agree with Bryce. I mean, for us, first of all, it's our first performance ever at the Kennedy Center. So just imagine, you have this group of incredible individuals that have dedicated their life to this art form that's not forever. Impermanence, So we
Right?
leave that. I mean, it is forever, but you know what I mean. At that level of, full-time commitment of a dance company.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're already this is the middle of our tour. They're already charged up with everything that they bring from what audiences around the world have given them. For me, there is never limits or guidelines to what an audience member, can feel. And ultimately, I really, think that, and I want audiences to feel a unique response to the performance, because now that, we had the COVID thing, it was done then, and then we moved on to move past that. And I'm seeing audiences responding to the work, and I see how much they connect with it at an emotional level. And for me, if they leave this space, that communion, that alter it in some way, that's what matters to me. Mm-hmm. Not exactly the message or not message. What Bryce and us thought about it is what Bryce and us thought about it and the trigger to the work, but the trigger is so much more. And I think that's the beauty of contemporary dance and dance, that you take away from it, something that's unique to you. Someone can be moved, someone can be challenged, a person can be wowed and inspired, but for me, it's connecting in one way or another and making people feel. I always say that I definitely do not tell people or try to tell people what to feel or what to think. Mm-hmm. That's really never part of my work. Not this one, but all of what I do, because, dance has many rhythms, many interpretations. And that's one of the wonderful things about the art form, that we can all, as Bryce said, we're all strangers. We sit, in a theater and some magic happens. and we'll witness the same thing at the same time. And that's an incredible thing that we must hold on to, no matter how much we live in a virtual world or in a world of, there's nothing can equal, having 4 musicians on stage and a group of dancers and an audience experiencing something, at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to both of you for joining us. Kennedy Center audiences are in for such a treat. We are so jealous. We hope that we'll get to see this work sometime in the future. Thank you for your time. We're so glad this worked out today.
Thank you so much, both.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Conversations on Dance is part of the ACAST Creator Network. For more information, visit conversationsondancepod.com.